Let me sum up the 42-page detailed judgment, rather 43-page detailed judgment of the three-member bench on the extension of the army chief. The issue is very simple. If the parliament, not the government, the parliament is unable to do the proper legislation, the army chief will have to retire on the date, which is kind of confusing. But the literal translation of the para that deals with the retirement part of the army chief in case legislation is not done seems to suggest that it will apply retrospectively, the date on which he was supposed to retire, which is the 29th of the last month. What was to become of these 6 months if he were to retire 6 months later, we do not know about that. But assume that these 6 months are also included. He has a tenure that is going to practically end after the completion of these 6 months, in case the government is unable to legislate properly on this. Now, for the government to legislate on this requires a lot of doing, because if they don't legislate, this army chief retires and they have to appoint a new army chief, and this is the directive given in the detailed judgment as well. So General Bajwa goes and somebody else replaces him. But if the government wants to prevent that, it has to legislate. Now, it can legislate with the help of the opposition, which seems very unlikely because of the high horse on which the government is riding, suggesting that starting from Prime Minister Imran Khan, that they do not need to talk to anybody because they are above the political fray. They haven't been able to do any legislation through consensus. It is very unlikely that they will be able to craft that consensus. Option number two, they basically have an underhand deal with parties like the PMLN and People's Party. Sounds very tempting, could also be done, but do you think that they will not claim their pound of flesh? PMLN, for instance, is going to insist on new elections and also Mr. Imran Khan basically being shown the door. People's Party will settle for nothing less than the new elections, and so will the other parties. So how will you craft consensus under the table when the parties are demanding really something which nobody can deliver other than the establishment itself? That's going to be option number two, but it's a tough one. Opposition will drive a hard bargain. Option number three is bypass the opposition, do the legislation minus the consensus in the House, which again will be very tragic because General Bajwa's personality will become more controversial. He will be seen to be backed only by one political party as far as the legislation is concerned, and then the legislation will also be challenged in the court of law because it will become a person-specific legislation. Option number four really is for PTI to think in terms of retiring General Bajwa and appointing a new army chief. And within PTI, let me tell you, give you the news here, there are people who are already looking at the names of other candidates for the post of the army chief in case legislation could not be done. Option number 4 or 5 is something that only General Bajwa can exercise. He may decide that it's in the fitness of things now for him to call it a day, and he seeks retirement and a new army chief comes in. Legislation will have to be done, but then it will not have to revolve around the person of the army chief. Which of the 4 or 5 options are going to come into play? Only time will tell, but you have more exciting weeks coming up in Pakistan. There's never a dull moment, particularly there won't be a dull moment in the coming weeks.